Everything you believe about kindness and generosity is destroying your relationships. Right now, as you watch this, someone in your life is losing respect for you, not because you're cruel or selfish, but because you give too much. The very thing you think makes you lovable is the exact reason people walk away. And today, we're going to uncover why the human psyche is wired to despise unlimited giving. You know that sinking feeling, don't you? You've bent over backwards for someone, given your time, energy, money, attention, sometimes sacrificing your own needs completely. You've been the reliable friend, the supportive partner, the family member who always says yes, and yet somehow they treat you with less respect than they show a stranger. Maybe they take longer to respond to your texts. Perhaps they cancel plans with you first because they know you'll understand. They might even roll their eyes when you offer help, or worse. They've started avoiding you altogether. You've noticed that the more you give, the less they seem to value what you offer. It's maddening, isn't it? You're doing everything right, according to what society teaches us about being a good person. Yet you feel invisible, taken for granted, even resented. Here's what's really happening. You've triggered one of the most powerful and counterintuitive mechanisms of human psychology. A mechanism so deeply embedded in our psyche that it operates completely below the threshold of conscious awareness. Most people live their entire lives never understanding this hidden force that's quietly sabotaging their relationships and self-worth. But here's what most people don't realize about the architecture of human respect. It's not built on gratitude. It's built on scarcity. The human brain evolved over millions of years to survive in environments where resources were limited and choices had consequences. Deep within our neural circuitry lies what psychologists call the scarcity detection system, a primitive but powerful mechanism that automatically assigns value based on availability. When something is abundant and freely given, our unconscious mind categorizes it as low value. When something is scarce and must be earned, it's automatically perceived as precious. Think about water. When it flows freely from your tap, you barely notice it. But if you were lost in a desert, that same H2O becomes the most valuable substance in existence. Your brain hasn't changed. The context of scarcity has changed everything. This isn't just theory. Neuroscientist Dr. Mauricio Delgado's research at Rutgers University reveals that our brain's reward center, the nucleus accumbens, fires most intensely not when we receive something we want, but in the moments of anticipation, when we're uncertain if we'll get it. Uncertainty and slight scarcity literally create the neurochemical conditions for desire and respect. When you overgive, you remove the element of scarcity from your relationships. You become the emotional equivalent of tap water, always available, never questioned, and tragically undervalued. Your constant availability signals to others' unconscious minds that you have low value, low options, and low self-respect. And here's the brutal truth. They begin to mirror back exactly what your behavior is telling them you're worth. The ancient philosophers understood this principle intimately. Lao Tzu wrote, "The sage does not attempt to do anything, and therefore never fails." This wasn't about being lazy. It was about understanding that when you make yourself completely available and predictable, you lose the mysterious quality that generates respect and fascination. Modern attachment theory confirms this ancient wisdom. Dr. John Gottman's research on relationship dynamics shows that partnerships thrive on what he calls positive mystery, the sense that your partner is choosing to be with you, not trapped by obligation or your neediness. When you overgive, you eliminate choice from the equation. You become a guarantee rather than a gift. Carl Jung identified this pattern in his work on psychological projection. When you consistently overgive, Others unconsciously project their own lack of self-worth onto you. They think, if this person gives so freely to someone like me, they must not value themselves very highly. Your overgiving becomes evidence of your own perceived worthlessness, creating a psychological feedback loop that destroys respect from both directions. Now we must go deeper into the heart of this paradox. Because what we're really talking about isn't just about giving. It's about the fundamental nature of human value and the invisible contracts we make in relationships. Every relationship operates on what psychologists call the equity principle, an unconscious ledger system where both parties constantly evaluate the balance of give and take. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. This ledger isn't just tracking material exchanges. It's measuring something far more subtle and powerful: the exchange of respect, autonomy, and personal sovereignty. When you overgive, you're not just offering your time or resources. You're unconsciously communicating a series of beliefs about yourself and the relationship that trigger deep, primitive responses in others. First, you signal that your time and energy have little value. If you're willing to give them away freely and without boundaries, they must not be worth much. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance in others. Their conscious mind might say, "This person is so generous," but their unconscious is receiving a very different message. This person doesn't value themselves. Second, you remove the other person's opportunity to reciprocate meaningfully. Humans have a deep psychological need to contribute, to feel valuable and needed. When you overgive, you rob others of the dignity of mutual exchange. You position yourself as the giver and them as the taker, creating an inherent power imbalance that breeds resentment over time. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this dynamic when he wrote about the gift-giving virtue in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. True generosity, he argued, comes from overflow, from someone so full of their own power and self-worth that they naturally share their abundance. But when giving comes from emptiness, from a desperate need to be needed, it becomes what he called slave morality, a subtle form of manipulation disguised as virtue. The deepest truth here is that overgiving is often unconscious control masquerading as love. When you give excessively, you're not just being generous. You're attempting to create obligation, to make yourself indispensable, to control how others see and treat you. On some level, you believe that if you give enough, you can purchase love, respect, and security. But the human psyche rebels against this kind of transactional relationship. People can sense, even if they can't articulate, when generosity has strings attached. Dr. Harriet Lerner, in her groundbreaking work on relationship dynamics, identified this as overfunctioning in relationships. When you overfunction, you don't just help others, you prevent them from developing their own competence and self-reliance. You create what she calls complementary underfunctioning, where your overgiving actually enables others to become more irresponsible, less grateful, and ultimately less respectful of you. This connects to a profound spiritual and psychological principle that mystics have understood for millennia. True power lies in restraint, not in endless giving. The Tao Te Ching speaks of the power of emptiness, of the space between the spokes that makes a wheel functional. Your boundaries, your no's, your selective availability, these create the psychological space that allows respect and desire to flourish. But perhaps the most devastating aspect of overgiving is what it does to your own psyche. When you consistently prioritize others' needs over your own, you send a clear message to your unconscious mind. I am not important. My needs don't matter. I exist to serve others. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness in relation to your own life. You become so focused on managing others' experiences that you lose touch with your own inner compass, your own desires, your own sovereignty. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote extensively about the search for meaning. He observed that people who found meaning in their suffering were those who maintained some sense of choice, some area where they could exercise their will. When you overgive, you often sacrifice your own capacity for choice. You become reactive rather than responsive, driven by others' needs rather than your own authentic impulses. So how do you break free from this pattern and reclaim the respect you deserve? The path forward requires what I call conscious restraint, the deliberate cultivation of boundaries that honor both your worth and others' capacity for reciprocity. The first step is understanding what psychologists call differentiation, the ability to maintain your sense of self, even in close relationships. Dr. Murray Bowen's family systems theory shows us that healthy relationships require two whole people choosing to connect, not one person dissolving themselves to accommodate another. This means developing what we might call generous boundaries, limits that actually serve the relationship by maintaining the necessary tension for respect to thrive. Start by implementing what I call the pause principle. Before automatically saying yes to any request, create a space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This pause allows you to check in with yourself. Am I giving from overflow or from emptiness? Am I saying yes because I genuinely want to contribute, or because I'm afraid of disappointment or rejection?" Next, develop what Brené Brown calls compassionate boundaries. These aren't walls built from anger or resentment, but loving limits that preserve your energy for sustainable giving. Tell yourself, I can be generous and still honor my own needs. I can care about others without sacrificing my own well-being. This isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation upon which all other respect is built. Practice what ancient Stoic philosophers called preferred indifference, caring about outcomes without being attached to them. When you offer help or support, do so without expecting specific responses or levels of gratitude. Give because the act of giving aligns with your values, not because you're trying to control how others see you. This removes the subtle manipulation from your generosity and allows it to be received as the pure gift it was meant to be. Implement the scarcity of availability principle. Just as businesses create value through limited time offers, you can create respect through limited availability. This doesn't mean being artificially scarce or playing games. It means honoring your own time and energy as precious resources. When people know that your time and attention are valuable because you treat them as valuable, they automatically assign higher worth to what you offer. Learn to recognize and interrupt your own overgiving triggers. These often stem from childhood experiences where love felt conditional on performance or caretaking. Maybe you learned that being helpful was the only way to stay safe in chaotic family dynamics. Maybe you discovered that giving was the only way to receive attention or affection. These patterns, formed in childhood, continue to run your adult relationships until you bring them into conscious awareness. Develop what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to tolerate others' disappointment without immediately rushing to fix it. When someone is upset that you've said no or set a boundary, resist the urge to over-explain or immediately capitulate. Their disappointment is information about their expectations, not evidence that you've done something wrong. Learning to sit with others' emotional responses without taking responsibility for managing them is one of the most powerful ways to build respect in relationships. Practice reciprocal giving, consciously creating opportunities for others to contribute to your life. Ask for help when you need it. Express genuine needs and allow others to meet them. This isn't about being needy or demanding. It's about creating the mutual exchange that healthy relationships require. When you allow others to give to you, you honor their capacity for generosity and create the balanced dynamic that sustains long-term respect. Cultivate what Jungian analysts call holding the tension of opposites. You can be generous and boundaried. You can be caring and self-respecting. You can be helpful and unavailable. These aren't contradictions. They're the dynamic balance that creates psychological maturity and commands respect. Finally, develop a practice of what I call energy auditing. Regularly check in with yourself. How do I feel after interactions with different people? Which relationships energize me and which drain me? Am I giving from a place of fullness or emptiness? Your body and emotions are constantly providing feedback about the health of your giving patterns. Learn to listen to these signals and adjust accordingly. Before we move toward integration, we must confront the shadow side of overgiving, the dark truths you've been avoiding about why you give so compulsively. Because until you face these hidden motivations, your attempts at healthy boundaries will always collapse under the weight of unconscious compulsion. The deepest truth. Overgiving is often a sophisticated form of emotional insurance. You're not just being generous, you're trying to insure yourself against abandonment, rejection, and the terrifying possibility of being truly known and potentially found lacking. Every excessive gift, every boundary you collapse, every time you say yes when your body screams no, these are premiums you're paying on a policy that promises, if I give enough, I'll be safe from being left. But here's what Carl Jung understood about psychological insurance policies. They always cost more than they protect. When you overgive to avoid abandonment, you guarantee the very abandonment you fear. You become so focused on being indispensable that you forget to be irreplaceable. There's a profound difference. Indispensable people are needed, but irreplaceable people are chosen. Dr. John Bowlby's attachment theory reveals that overgiving often stems from what he called anxious attachment, a deep-seated fear that love is conditional and must be earned through performance. If you learned early that love was scarce and had to be purchased through good behavior, overgiving becomes your adult strategy for managing this primal terror. You're not just helping others. You're desperately trying to prove your worthiness of love. The shadow reveals itself in the rage that emerges when your giving isn't appreciated. Notice how quickly hurt transforms into anger when someone doesn't respond to your generosity with the gratitude you expected. This rage is the shadow's way of showing you the truth. Your giving wasn't unconditional love. It was a transaction you expected to be honored. You gave with invisible strings attached, then felt betrayed when others didn't feel obligated to dance to your unspoken music. Martha Beck, in her work on authentic living, identifies this as emotional manipulation through martyrdom. The overgiver unconsciously believes, if I suffer enough for you, you'll have to love me. But suffering is not a currency that purchases love. It's often the very thing that repels the healthy love you're seeking, while attracting the dysfunctional relationships that feel familiar. There's another shadow truth. Overgiving allows you to avoid the vulnerability of receiving. When you're always the giver, you never have to face the terrifying possibility of asking for what you need and potentially being told no. You maintain the illusion of control. Better to give and be disappointed than to ask and be rejected. But this strategy keeps you trapped in relationships where you're never truly known because you've never allowed yourself to be truly needy. Modern neuroscience reveals something fascinating about why overgiving backfires so consistently. It literally rewires both your brain and the brains of those around you in ways that diminish mutual respect. Dr. Robert Sapolsky's research at Stanford shows that when we receive predictable rewards, including predictable kindness, our dopamine systems stop responding. Your constant availability becomes neurologically invisible to others. Their brains, optimized for detecting novelty and unpredictability, simply tune out your consistent giving. You become part of the background noise of their lives. But there's more. When you overgive, you activate what neuroscientists call the caretaker neural network in your own brain, a pattern of activation that prioritizes others' needs over your own internal signals. Over time, this creates what Dr. Dan Siegel calls neural pathway dominance. Your brain literally becomes more skilled at reading others' needs than recognizing your own, creating a biological basis for self-abandonment. The people receiving your overgiving experience their own neurological changes. Mirror neuron research shows that we unconsciously mirror the emotional states of those around us. When you consistently undervalue yourself through overgiving, others' brains begin to mirror your self-disrespect. They don't consciously choose to respect you less. Their neural networks are literally learning to devalue you by mirroring your own self-treatment. Dr. Matthew Lieberman's research on social pain reveals why boundary violations feel so devastating. Your brain processes emotional rejection using the same neural pathways as physical pain. When you overgive and others don't reciprocate with the respect you crave, your brain literally experiences this as injury. The hurt isn't imaginary, it's neurologically real. This creates what psychologists call a trauma bonding pattern. Your overgiving creates painful experiences that your brain tries to solve with more giving, creating an addictive cycle. Like any addiction, overgiving provides temporary relief from anxiety, while ultimately making the underlying problem worse. Ancient wisdom traditions understood something about human nature that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. Respect is earned through conscious restraint, not endless availability. The Buddhist concept of mudita, sympathetic joy, teaches us to celebrate others' success without needing to be the cause of it. When you overgive, you rob others of the joy of their own competence, their own problem-solving abilities, their own heroic journey. You become what Buddhists call a hungry ghost, always trying to fill an internal emptiness through external giving, never finding satisfaction. Ancient Stoicism offers another profound insight through Epictetus's teaching on the dichotomy of control. The Stoics understood that trying to control others' responses to your giving is a form of what they called preferred indifference. Things you might prefer but cannot ultimately control. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do your job without any concern for the results," he was describing the only form of giving that preserves your inner sovereignty. The Taoist principle of Wu Wei, effortless action, suggests that the most powerful interventions often look like non-intervention. Water doesn't force its way around rocks. It finds the path of least resistance and, over time, reshapes entire landscapes. Your restraint, your thoughtful nose, your selective availability. These create the space for others to step into their own power. Indigenous wisdom traditions speak of ceremonial reciprocity, the understanding that healthy relationships require balanced exchange over time. When you overgive, you disrupt this sacred balance, creating what Native American traditions call spiritual debt, an energetic imbalance that ultimately harms both giver and receiver. The ancient Greek concept of metron, the golden mean, taught that virtue lies between extremes. The mean between selfishness and self-sacrifice isn't somewhere in the middle. It's the dynamic balance that honors both your needs and others' dignity. This isn't compromise. It's the conscious dance of mutual respect. The journey from overgiving to balanced generosity is ultimately a journey from unconscious people-pleasing to conscious self-respect. It's about recognizing that true kindness often looks like loving boundaries, and that respect, both from others and for yourself, grows in the space between availability and restraint. This isn't about becoming selfish or withholding love. It's about becoming conscious of your motivations for giving and ensuring that your generosity serves both you and others in sustainable ways. When you give from overflow rather than emptiness, when you maintain your sense of self even in the act of service, you model what healthy relationship dynamics look like. You teach others how to treat you not through words, but through the respect you demonstrate for your own time, energy, and worth. The people who are meant to be in your life will not only respect your boundaries, they'll appreciate them. They'll recognize that your selective availability makes your presence more precious, not less valuable. They'll understand that your self-respect creates the container within which genuine intimacy can flourish. Start today. Choose one area where you've been overgiving and implement one boundary. Notice the internal resistance, the voice that says you're being selfish, that you should do more, that others need you to sacrifice yourself. Recognize this voice as the internalized programming that has kept you trapped in patterns that diminish rather than enhance your relationships. This is your invitation to psychological revolution, to step out of the unconscious patterns that have been running your relationships and into the conscious choice of balanced generosity. Your future self, and everyone who loves you authentically, will thank you for having the courage to value yourself enough to give consciously rather than compulsively. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But I would add this: the most liberating thing is to respect yourself completely. When you honor your own worth through conscious boundaries and balanced giving, you don't just change your relationships, you change your entire relationship with life itself. The ancient Greeks had a word, sophrosyne, meaning the wisdom of self-restraint. In a world that often confuses endless availability with love, sophrosyne becomes a revolutionary act. Your boundaries are not walls. They're the sacred space where your authentic self dwells. And from that space, your truest gifts can flow. Remember, you are not here to be convenient. You are here to be conscious. And consciousness, expressed through balanced generosity and loving boundaries, is the foundation upon which all genuine respect is built. The question isn't whether you deserve respect. The question is whether you're willing to claim it. Until the next time, be well, dear fellow. PSYphile.